Welcome on behalf of Holocaust Museum LA. My name is Michael Morgenstern, and I'm pleased to welcome you to our program this afternoon, Medical Ethics, Lessons from the Past, presented by Dr. Raul Artal-Mittelmark. Holocaust Museum LA was founded in the early 1960s by Holocaust survivors who wanted to make sure that future generations would always remember and learn from this tragic part of our history. And they did this at a time when many people were not yet willing to learn about the Holocaust, and as a result, many survivors were not yet willing to relive their trauma. But thanks to the courage and foresight of this group of survivors, we have what became the first and oldest Holocaust museum in the United States, always with the mission to commemorate, educate, and inspire future generations. This afternoon, you have an opportunity to learn about the role of physicians and nurses during the Holocaust, as well as the origins of informed consent. And our speaker, Dr. Raul Artal-Mittelmark, is a Holocaust survivor who was born in a concentration camp in Transnistria. And in addition to this research, he shares his story frequently at our museum and educates students on a regular basis. And it is my honor and privilege to welcome him here today. And after the talk, you can use the Q&A box to ask questions. And I want to thank everyone so much for being here today. And thank you so much to Dr. Artal for being with us today and for sharing your research with us. And you may begin.
Thank you very much, Michael. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure being with you here today and share information that is rarely used at meetings like this one, and actually not known by many of the physicians as to where the informed consent originated. It's important to point out that during the Nazi Germany occupation of most of Europe, Nazi Germany established 44,000 concentration extermination camp ghettos, and many of those places also medical experiments did occur, and we'll mention a few of those and the horrible things that were done during that period. Nazi Germany passed 1,400 Jewish, anti-Jewish laws during that period of time. For them, the Jewish people were like animals that can be used for research. And in many occasions, we can say that animals were treated much better than the Jews. All the physicians during their career are taking the oath of Hippocrates that originates back to the Mid Ages. Basically, I took that oath also, and I swear by Apollo, physician, by Asclepius, by health, by Panacea, and by all gods and goddesses, making them my witnesses, that I will carry out, according to my ability and judgment, this oath. If I carry out this oath, may I gain forever reputation, but if I transgress it, may the opposite befall on me. Sadly, during World War II, 50% of all physicians in Nazi Germany did not take the Hippocratic Oath. But swore allegiance to the Nazi Reich. I'm sorry. Swore allegiance to the Nazi Reich and to the protection of Aryan blood. This is a painting by a Holocaust survivor. And here are Nazi physicians conducting experiments in victims that in many cases were alive. The image refers to medical experimentation done on inmates at various concentration camps. We're all familiar with Dr. Mengel's little experiments on twin at Auschwitz and simulated gunshot experiments on women at Ravensbrück. The paradox of the Nazi era was that an order from Goering in October 1933 actually prohibited experimentations on animals, but not on human beings. For Nazi Germany, Jews were below animals. The painting that you just saw a moment ago is linked to Rembrandt's famous group of portrait at Amsterdam Surgeons Guild, The Anatomy Lesson. 50% of all the doctors in Germany by 1944 did not take the oath, but swore allegiance instead to the Reich and to the protection of the Aryan blood. This is the pledge that Nazi nurses took during World War II. I solemnly pledge myself before God in the presence of this assembly to pass my life in purity and to practice my profession faithfully. I will abstain from whatever is deleterious and mischievous and will not take knowingly administer any harmful drug. I will do all in my power to maintain and elevate the standard of my profession. With loyalty will I endeavor to aid the physician in his work and devote myself to the welfare of those committed to my care. But that never happened. Despite the pledge to do no harm, primum non nocere, this pledge was not kept. A few milestones. In 1859, Charles Darwin, author of The Origin of Species, proposes natural selection or biological determinism. In 1983, Francis Galton, who was Darwin's cousin, was the first to coin the term eugenics, which basically meant the study of improving the qualities of the human species. And for that, they murdered close to 6 million Jews. In 1889, Friedrich Nietzsche declares God is dead in his twilight of the gods. He proposes a new morality for physicians and said, the sick man is a parasite of the society, and for certain conditions, it is indecent to live longer. This world eugenics movement in many countries, in England, and they established a society, English Eugenics Society in 1930. The Swedes established a society, the racial characters of the Swedish nations, and even in South America and Brazil, a eugenics society was set up. However, eugenics was also most popular in the USA. Courses were taught at, excuse me, at Columbia University, at Brown University, at Northwestern University, at Harvard University, at Cornell University, and University of Wisconsin. This is the emblem, a poster of the Eugenics Society. And at the Third International Eugenics Congress adopted this emblem. Eugenics is the self-direction of human evolution. Like a tree, eugenics draws its material from many sources and organizes them into an harmonious entity. And it focuses on psychology, genetics, mental health, anthropometry, heredity, population study, families, stock, migration, and all based on statistics. A few historical events. In 1897, Michigan, the state of Michigan, was the first state to introduce compulsory sterilization for certain conditions. In 1927, a monumental decision by Supreme Court in the Bucks versus Bell case. Permitting compulsory sterilization of the unfit. Between 1932 and 1972, the awful syphilis experiments were conducted at Tuskegee. Between 1963 and 1973, the University of Washington conducted irradiation experiments to observe the effects of radiations on people that were radiated. United States continued to sterilize the unfit, quote unquote, until 1981. And that was in the state of Oregon. Excuse me. 70,000 Americans were forcibly sterilized for eugenic reasons. Eugene Fisher, the head of the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute of Anthropology, Eugenics, and Human Heredity in Germany. He was able to continue his racial hygienic experiments until 1967. In 1895, Dr. Alfred Ploetz, physician eugenist, coined the term racial hygiene. In 1933, he wrote, Hitler would bring racial hygiene into the mainstream. In 1933, Hitler and Nazi enacted the Sterilization Act. It should send the Mandatory Sterilization Act, the law for the prevention of the hereditary diseased offspring. Those that had any malformation or any impediment were sterilized, and many of them killed. Adolf Hitler, coined in German as Arzt des deutschen Volks, doctor, became the people's physician. And under his guidance, 3 laws were passed, the infamous Nuremberg laws, the Reichscitizenship law, the law for the protection of German blood and German honor, and the law for the protection of the genetic health of the German people. Nazi sterilization law implemented in July 1933 mandated involuntary sterilization to the following: those that had congenital, some mental deficiency, deafness or blindness should be eliminated, sterilized and eliminated, epilepsy, severe alcoholism, Huntington disease, schizophrenia, any severe malformation, and being Jewish was considered to be an incurable disease, and the Jews had to be eliminated. Tables like this appeared in all the doctors' offices for those that were pure German, for those that were of mixed race, or those that were pure Jewish. And according to this table, it was decided who should remain alive and who should be murdered. And their practice of racism, all the physicians were equipped with this very rudimentary equipment to measure the circumference of the head, the length of the nose, and other features. And they called it the practice of science of race. In Germany, during the Third Reich, more than 2,000 physicians joined the Nazi Physician League in 1929, 4 years before Hitler became chancellor. More than 38,000, about 50% of all the physicians in Germany, voluntarily joined the Nazi Party by the end of World War II. It was estimated that up to 35% of nurses joined the Nazi Party. 7% of all physicians were members of the elite SS murder unit, compared to less than 0.5% in the general population. German physicians, nurses, midwives, and others participated willingly in the euthanasia programs and the coerced research. This is a gathering of the nurses at their swearing-in ceremony in Nazi Party in Berlin and elsewhere. Here they are, the nurses that pledged to the Nazi Party and followed in its directions. Here is Hitler mingling with the nurses and thanking them for their faithful, murderous tasks. Many of the nurses were elevated to the level of officers, just like these two officers on the side of this nurse. The master race at the German Hygiene Museum in 1940. Nazi Germans considered themselves as the master race. The goal encouraged reproduction, increase the size of the master race. The nurses and midwives had 3 roles: foremost, motherliness, racial engineering, and Lebensborn, fountain source of life. Nurses were instructed to select racially worthy orphans for adoption and care for children born from Aryan women in relationship with SS members, or orphan children with Nordic features, blonde hair, and blue eyes. I would have been qualified to be selected because I had blonde hair and blue eyes, but one deficiency. I was born and hiding in a Nazi concentration camp. Born and hiding in a Nazi concentration camp in Bersha, Transnistria. Later, in the occupied countries, babies with Nordic features were kidnapped from their parents and adopted by German SS families. And in most of the cases, their parents were killed. It estimated that about 100 were kidnapped. Here, Polish babies with these Aryan features, blonde hair, blue eyes, which were selected and adopted by ethnic Germans in Poland. And before releasing, nurses will expose the babies to sun lamp to lighten the color of their hair to make it as blonde as possible. And here, children, you can see here the boy already had his hair made blonde on their way to adoption. Then the transition occurred between from eugenics, killings of the disabled, to euthanasia. And this poster appeared everywhere, written in German here, hier trägt du Mut, you are sharing the load, Jews depicted as monkeys, genetically ill individual cost approximately 50,000 Reichmarks by the age of 60. From the beginning of 1933, midwives were included in the practice of racial eugenics. They were obligated to report hereditary diseases, malformed newborns, small children, children of forced slave laborers, and midwives were required to participate in the euthanasia program and to perform abortions on the slave workers. August 18, 1939, the Secret Reich Committee for Hereditary Health was quickly renamed Reichskommittee for the Scientific Registering of Serious Hereditary and Congenital Illnesses. The committee introduced compulsory registration of all malformed newborn children. Doctors, nurses, and midwives, believe it or not, were given a monetary incentive of 28 Reich for the obligatory reporting. This would be like $280. Mental retardation and Down syndrome, microcephaly, hydrocephaly, any physical deformity, spastic paralysis, and Jews. Being Jewish was considered to be a hereditary incurable disease. This is a letter signed by Hitler on the right that charged with the responsibility to extend the power of specific doctors in such a way that after the most careful assessment of their condition, those suffering from illnesses deemed to be incurable may be granted a mercy deed letter written to the Nazi leader Bowler and Dr. Karl Brandt. Dr. Brandt was also Hitler's escort physician. And at the Nuremberg trial of Nazi doctors, Dr. Karl Brandt acknowledged his personal responsibility for the murder, for the killing of 90,000 Jewish kids. And Dr. Karl Adolf Brandt, physician surgeon, SS officer, Hitler's escort physician, was condemned to death at the Nuremberg trials. He planned and participated in medical experiments without consent, mass murder of prisoners, as I indicated, up to 90,000, and the euthanasia program. 28 institutions were rapidly equipped with extermination facilities. Included were some Germany's oldest and most highly respected hospitals and castles. I visited many of these places, and it's chilling to walk through the long corridors, freezing corridors, and these castles. Poisons were administered slowly to all these kids so that the cause of death could be disguised as pneumonia, bronchitis, or other complication. Or often children were starved to death without heat until they froze to death. So it could be told the parents that they died of natural causes. Here with the black dots, these euthanasia centers, you can see them all over Greater Germany, that were established between 1940 and 45. Sorry. Nurses participated in the euthanasia programs. At the killing centers, patients were met by a male or female nurses. Excuse me. Patients were examined, photographed, and measured, then taken to gas chambers where were disguised as shower rooms. The nurses had told them that they would be battered. Most patients accepted the nurse's explanation that they were going to the showers. The patients were gassed and cremated, burned. Parents were informed by a standardized letter that their child had died suddenly and unexpected of brain edema, appendicitis, or other fabricated causes. The parents were also informed that owing to the danger of an epidemic, the body had to be cremated immediately. And 41 all doctors, nurses, and medical personnel were ordered to register not just infants, but all minors known to have crippling handicaps. Anyone failing to register such individuals could be fined up to 150 Reichmarks or face imprisonment up to 4 weeks. This is one of these euthanasia centers that I visited. You can see from the outside, it looks like a beautiful castle. Inside, when you walk through the cold and dark corridors, it's absolutely chilling, and you can feel the horrors that occurred in these centers. Hadamar was another center, and children were killed. And here you can see after their murder, they were cremated and smog coming out of the building. This is the portrait of Irmgard Huber. She was the chief nurse at the Hadamar Institute in her office. If you would meet this person anywhere, on the street, supermarket, you will think that this is a very kind and nice nurse, well, person. In reality, it was one of the worst criminals described in the Nazi literature. Here are the Nazi nurses that conducted those tasks of cremating the children. Nurses and midwives were active participants in every phase of the euthanasia program. More than 70,000 German citizens were euthanized by nurses at these facilities, 70,000. Most of the nurses did not see any wrong in their actions. Many of the nurses rationalized that they were releasing patients from suffering or just following doctor's orders. The doctor told me that this person should not live any longer, which were not challenged. Many of the nurses were never punished, with the exceptions of very few. At the new nurses Munich trial in 1965, only 14 nurses were prosecuted. This was the parallel to the Nuremberg trials of physicians, Nazi physicians. It has been well documented that a number of nurses were reluctant to work at euthanasia centers. Requested and were transferred to regular hospital with no consequences, and therefore they had a choice. But many admired Hitler, and many nurses admired him and followed his instructions. Public pressure forced Hitler to close the euthanasia program in spring of 1941. From euthanasia, a quick transition to the final solution. All Jewish people were condemned. Heredity was the main focus. 6 million Jews, including 1.5 million children, were selected and exterminated because of bad genes. In German, Minderwertig. This is a model fetal risk of genetic disease published in 2017 by the American College of Medical Genetics. And you can actually see that Ashkenazi Jews had less congenital disorders than the Northern European to which Germans belonged, much less than Northern European. From euthanasia centers to concentration camps, the euthanasia killing programs were expanded to include concentration camps. As I indicated, 44,000 concentration extermination camps, ghettos, were established during World War II. My parents were driven in 1942 to a concentration camp in Transnistria, Bersha, Transnistria, located between the river Dniester and Bug, and I was born there in hiding. These are the map with the 44,000 concentration camps all over Europe. Here is Auschwitz. And here is Transnistria. In the middle is a place, a small Jewish town called Bershad, where I was born and hiding. And this is Odessa, very much in the news right now. IBM, you won't believe it, was an active participation in the killing campaign. To assist the SS, Nazi Germany, IBM invented the first computer to figure out in the general population who was Jewish. I highly recommend a book about the IBM. This is an award-winning books, the IBM and the Holocaust. Highly recommended. It's fascinating to learn more as to how much some human being could reach, how low. Physicians and nurses had a central role in the final solution and prisoners' killing. We're all familiar with the ramp selection, with Mengele on the ramp, accompany patients in Red Cross car to crematoria. They call them patients. Choose the appropriate number of pellets of gas. Observe through the hole how the victims were dying. When the victims were dead, order the opening of the gas chamber. Sign the form confirming that the victims were dead and how long it took. Observe the extraction of teeth to recover gold and obtain pathological specimen. Focus was on brain. And furthermore, the nurses were also assisting in medical experiments. Among them, some of the notorious experiments conducted by physicians was the hypothermia, freezing to death experiments at Dachau by Dr. Rascher and assisted by University of Kiel professors and nurses. Data of hypothermia survival were presented at the annual meeting of Luftwaffe, the Air Force Medical Service in Nuremberg. 95 physicians were in attendance in October of 42. Here you can see in front Dr. S.S. Rascher and the nurse assistant freezing to death a victim. Deadly altitude decompression chambers, another horrible experiment conducted by Dr. Zygmunt Rasches and his assistants, where they will decompress these chambers and see how long it took to die. This was done for the benefit of pilots to see to what altitude they can fly, because at that time decompression in airplanes was not that good. Experiments on gypsy at Dachau. Seawater was infused by physicians and assisted by nurses to see what happens to the pilots that jumped in the seawater of a different location and see how long they can survive the seawater, the salty seawater. At Ravensburg, Dr. Karl Gebhardt and Dr. Hertha Oberhäuser, assisted by nurse Gerda Kürnheim, would inflicted wounds on predominantly women, Jewish women, and test the effect of antibiotics. It also transplanted soldiers' amputated limbs. Here at Ravensburg, amputated limbs taken from other inmates. Malaria, typhus, and typhoid were studied, induced infection in experiments on more than 1,000 healthy inmates who were infected with malaria, typhus, or typhoid. At Dachau, Dr. Rascher, infamous blood coagulation experiments, basically bleeding to death the prisoners. Nazi doctors performed grotesque, cruel experiments in the innocently labeled surgery department. I visited this place. It's chilling, even now that it's a museum, to go through the chambers of this torture and homicide building. This is the infamous Dr. Mengele at Dachau. The concentration camp conducted experiments, as I say, exsanguination of patient experiments. And here in this photograph, Dr. Mengele will frequently go to the train where the victims will arrive and select individuals for his experiments. Victims of the master race, the twin studies at Auschwitz-Birkenau. Here he had Mengele had a fascination with studies to be conducted on twins. The Nazi physician Karl Klauberg and Dr. Schumann and nurses here engaging in sterilization experiments at the Block 10 at Auschwitz. Nurses were active participants in the sterilization experiments. These were the batches of research subject victims. 21,000 Sinti Romas, 6,800 forced labor and nutritional famine research, 10,000 additional at the site of the Inspector Schenk, 2,000 Jews at Vienna Immigration Office for sent to similar experiments in the island of Greit, 2,500 British prisoners infected with hepatitis, and also on hundreds of Greek civilians. 20,000 victims were used by Nazi physicians for anatomical research. Total Nazi medical research victims close to 100,000. Of them, about 20% Jewish, 20% Sinti Roma or Gypsies, and another 40,000 not known. And here they are, the scientists. And here in a group a photo of these individuals that were all criminals conducting the most grotesque experiments on men and women at primarily at Auschwitz. Here are pregnant women at Auschwitz. It's important to point out that there were two nurse midwives at Auschwitz. One was Stanislava Leszczyńska, and the other one was a Nazi nurse. Stanislava Leszczyńska is a candidate for sainthood. She would hide the newborn babies that she delivered. She would hide them between the legs of the women and cover them with newspapers. The women were taken to the barracks, and the guards were by and large afraid to go into the barracks because fear of contagious disease. Take into account that at that time there were no antibiotics. She's a candidate for canonization. She was an incredible, courageous woman, and she was able to save about 30 babies. The other babies were starved. There was a second nurse midwife there who was used to do these murders. Carla was her name, and she was there for having been a criminal and sender for her criminal activities prior to World War II. And here are the insides of those barracks. The guards would not go into the barracks afraid of catching contagious disease. Bershad, Transnistria. Transnistria was an area between the rivers Dniester and Bug in western Ukraine, that during World War II was occupied by Nazi fascist Romania and used for the deportation of Jews, and the Jews were used as slaves on Durchstrasse D. My parents were sent there in October of 42, and my mother, an early pregnancy, and then I was delivered in hiding in a similar half-destroyed farmhouse. I visited Bershad a couple of times, and that's how more than half of Bershad looks to this day. It never changed since World War II. Bershad was in the area of Vinica in Western Ukraine. As a gift to Hitler, all the Jews in the area were killed. Einsatzkommando D, under the command of Otto Hollenberg, who was in charge with the territory. Women and children were delivered at the Vinica hospitals. The nurses and doctors were instructed to kill the babies. And the babies were placed in sacks and thrown on the street from the second and third floor of the hospital, just like unwanted kittens. Important to point out that not far from Bershad and the city of Vinica, and this is a famous photograph. The Nazi Germans built I'm sorry about our dog here. At the Vinica, they would have the Jewish mothers deliver their babies there, and the baby were placed in sacks and thrown on the street, just like unwanted kittens. This photograph is very famous because it was taken at a place near Vinica and found in the pocket of this Nazi German soldier. An anticipation of Hitler's visit to Vinica, where the Nazis built a bunker and a forest close by for Hitler, from where he planned to direct the last attack on Moscow. Of course, he never got to do that. But all the Jews in the area were murdered. And on the back of this photograph was written, "The last Jew in Vinica." Dr. Gisela Perl, an absolute saint, she was also, she was Jewish and the inmate at Auschwitz. She was known for risking her personal safety, and even to be shot for assisting Jewish inmates with different medical disorders. And she attended many of those deliveries. Between 38 and 39 Jewish physicians were decertified in Germany. They were not allowed to treat German patients. Jewish midwives were banned from the profession. Eduard Bloch, the physician, ironically, the personal physician of Hitler, was Jewish. And Hitler used to frequently say that if all physicians would have been like Dr. Bloch, there would not have been a Jewish problem. However, Dr. Bloch actually survived the war, and after the war, he lived in Bronx, and he passed there. 300 Jewish physicians were taken from camps and sent to the Russian front to provide medical care to Nazi soldiers. Those that refused were executed. Jewish physicians and nurses in camps and ghettos, many of them risked their lives to save others, performed secret abortions, like Gisela, Pearl, and cared for the sick and assisted with deliveries. As most of you know, that more than 6 million Jews were selected and killed. 400 German patients were selected and sterilized for having what they described mental retardation. 5,000 German children were selected and euthanized for the same reason. 200,000 German adults selected and euthanized. Only 15% of all patients in German mental hospitals at the start of World War II survived. Cruel, murderous medical experiments conducted on thousands of concentration camp inmates and other by Nazi physicians and nurses. These are the killer nurses at their trials in Nuremberg. Here are the killer nurses at the trial of the Nazi nurses. The head nurse at the concentration camp called Ravensbrück was Elizabeth Marshall. And another one was the nurse guard at Ravensbrück, Irma Grisi. They were both known, including Vera Salveguard, that they were the most cruel and impassionate human beings. Vera Salveguard, who took active participation in the killing of Jewish inmates, used to frequently say, "What does it matter to me? What does it matter to me?" She was a nurse at the Ravensbrück concentration camp. Here is the doc at Nuremberg physician trials of Karl Brandt, standing here. Karl Brandt, the escort physician of Hitler. And at the Nuremberg physician's trial, Karl Brandt personally acknowledged participation in the murder of 90,000 Jewish people. Just imagine a physician that took the hypocrisy obligation by physician to care for human beings, took personal responsibility for the murder of 90,000 Jewish people. In total, 5,000 men and women convicted. Only 23 physicians were tried. 7 were acquitted. 7 received death sentence. The remainder received prison from 10 years to life. Only 60 women, including 14 nurses, were tried. 21 nurses were executed. Remainder received prison 10 years to life. After the war, the issue was raised, should medical data obtained from experiments at the concentration camp be considered? Does it have any scientific validity? What are the moral and ethical issues? Should the data be published or quoted? It was decided not to. Moral failures of physicians and nurses was that they adopted eugenics, a pseudoscience, adoption of implementation of race laws and forced sterilization, adoption and participation in the euthanasia program, life not worth living and mass extermination, participation in sadistic and deadly experiment without consent. It's probably not known to most of you. Most of the physicians don't know that the judges at the Nuremberg trials of the Nazi physicians mandated that no medical treatment, assistance, or intervention should be conducted without an informed consent. Very few physicians actually know that the informed consent that you sign in a doctor's office, at the hospital or clinic, originated at the Nuremberg trials of the Nazi physicians and nurses. Dr. Thomas Thompson, a psychiatrist and officers in the British Canadian Air Force, was the first to name medical war crimes as a special category for prosecution. He laid the groundwork at Nuremberg trials for the novel mandate by the judges of informed consent, that no medical intervention or surgical intervention should be conducted without the informed consent of the patient. At the conclusion of the Nazi doctors' trials in 1947, the justices issued the Nuremberg Code, on which the first Code of Human Subject Research and Voluntary Consent emphasized 4 basic principles: autonomy, beneficence, no maleficence, do no harm, and justice. The Nuremberg Code, informed consent, is basically voluntary, well-informed understanding consent. Should aim at positive results, be based on previous knowledge. Unnecessary physical or mental injuries should avoid it. Should not be conducted when there is a risk of death or disabling injury from the experiment. Should be in proportion to humanitarian benefits. Must provide protection against the experiment's risk. The staff should be fully trained and scientifically qualified. Human subjects must be free to quit experiments, must be free to quit experiment at any time. Medical staff must stop experiment at any point if dangerous. The same code was adopted for medical treatment, and no medical treatment should be conducted without an informed consent. Why? Why the Nazi ideology? The Nazi ideology had a great deal to do with why these experiments were conducted or even allowed. Doctors believed that they were doing a great service to their country in the name of Hitler. They were so brainwashed that they believed they were doing good things. By killing unwanted people, they thought they were killing German people. The healing-killing paradox allowed the doctors to feel less guilty. How physicians trained to become healers became killer, the justification was the concept of life unworthy of life. Throughout history, we find that the wish to play God, racism, xenophobia, and science were periodically intertwined. This should not be allowed. Could the master race concept movement re-emerge? There are potential risks, nefarious application of the new field of genomics or practice in China, where one can has the CRISPR quaternary and cast and paste DNA technology. There is today technology where you can create aggressive people, warrior, or other ethical or non-ethical features, create smarter, fitter, or more violent humans. For good or for ill, China is set to lead the way for human enhancement. They do not follow the international principles for informed consent. These are the milestones for principal research. In 2019, in effect, the new federal policy for the protection of human subjects, the new common rule explicitly excludes public health surveillance from human subject research. According to the said statistics, according to a survey of 2013, only 22 of the 140 medical schools include in their medical school curricula material about the origin of the informed consent. Maybe a few more now. It was not known or recorded how many nursing schools include the lessons of genocide and Holocaust in their curriculum. I would like to conclude with a quote from Elie Wiesel, um, who considered me to be his younger friend. And he used to say, I swore never to be silent whenever and wherever human beings endure suffering and humiliation. We must always take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormentor. When he accepted his Nobel Prize in 1986, Elie Wiesel reflected upon his life since World War II, and he said, I swore never to be silent whenever and wherever human beings endure suffering and humiliation. His words take a renewed significance for all of us, and those should be words that we should never forget. I thank you for your attention, and if we have time, Michael, I'm available for questions.
Thank you so much for sharing with us, and we do have time for questions. And if it's okay with you, I'm just going to take your screen down for the Q&A. Thank you again so much. Again, anyone who has questions, we can use the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. When did you start researching this?
Well, since my birth, I was exposed to the horrible things that happened during World War II. And when the camp was liberated, my parents were able to hitchhike on a Russian truck with soldiers, Soviet soldiers. One soldier felt sorry for me and pulled out a piece of chocolate for me. I never had solid food before that, and I made a grimace and did not taste the chocolate. And one of the soldiers told my mother, "Don't worry, he will grow up and become a great commander in the Red Army." And my mother, who was a concert pianist and never missed a beat, she replied, "Oh, my son will become a doctor and help in the healing of sick people." And I heard that thing many, many times. And my mother always used to tell me, you should never forget, and you should share the sad history of our people. And I did.
Thank you. Where was most of your career?
Most of my career was in high-risk obstetrics, where I assisted sick mothers with disease or sick mothers that required surgeries during their pregnancy, and try to save children because of obstetrical problems. And it was figured out at my retirement that I probably assisted in the delivery of 3,000 babies, and that I assisted the vast majority of these mothers what one medical or surgical condition that I helped curing.
Thank you. Um, what do you think prompts some survivors to not want to speak about their experiences, whereas there are a lot of survivors like you who shares their stories on a regular basis?
For many people, it's very painful to bring up some of the most horrible experiences that they had to endure during their incarceration or persecution by Nazi Germany. And those were not simple incarceration. The victims were always under the fear of being murdered. So as I indicated before, um, uh, Elie Wiesel, whom I knew, he encouraged me many times to never be silent, and wherever I can, is to share the sad history of the Jewish people. 6 million of whom were murdered. Among them, 1.5 million children, Jewish children, were murdered. So he thought that I should dedicate much of my medical career also to focus on the ethics of medicine.
Thank you.
Here is
If you hold it up a little bit more, okay, we can see it now.
this is Elie. He used to call me his friend.
Thank you for sharing that. Do you know where we can learn a little bit more about the Lebensborn programs?
I'm sorry, which programs?
Lebensborn,
No, I'm not
the
familiar.
so
Lebensborn.
yes,
Oh, Lebensborn, yes, sure.
yes.
It was mandated by Nazi Germany that orphan kids should be adopted by Nazi officers, and they were never told that they were Jewish and came from Jewish families. I think I shared with you one image of such children on their way to the adopted homes.
And do you know if those children were how they so that were treated in their new homes?
I'm sorry, we have a very, very bad
Sorry.
connection. Can you repeat the question?
Yes, I apologize. Do you know how those children were treated in their new homes?
They were treated just like other children, and then most of them grew up, and it took them a long time to find out that they were Jewish. Many of them don't know it, and in the German population, there may be a lot of descendants of Jews that don't know that they are Jewish.
Thank you so much. And to conclude, we have a comment that says, "Thank you for your presentation. I am currently applying to medical school. What do you most hope that my peers and I in the future class of 2029 will take from this presentation to our future medical practice?"
Well, I think most, if not all, of the medical schools mandate teaching informed consent. And I think that's the lesson that has to be taken, that no medical procedure or intervention should be conducted without an informed consent. And I believe that there is a mandate that there are about 120, 124 medical schools to teach medical ethics and with emphasis of informed consent.
Thank you so much for sharing with us today. And of course, thank you so much to our audience for being here and for your attention and questions. And we appreciate everything you do so much for our community by sharing your story so often to students and then by sharing this research as well to the public. We appreciate you so much and everything that you do for our community. And again, thank you to our audience and wishing everybody who observes a pleasant holiday coming up. And again, thank you, everyone.
Thank you for attending.